let's continue to narrow it down because, again, I'm the guy who's like, I love this movie and I hate it. So I'm torn. I got a wide range. If you truly think it goes at number 5, I can accept it. But I don't see it defeating classic Bond outings like License to Kill, which is the best revenge tale we have in the series. It is a complete assassination plot. And then The Spy Who Loved Me, which is one of the best just archetypal Bond outings where it's like the bad guy who's just like an insane person, and we're just fighting the insane person. The Man with the Golden Gun, which has its flaws, as everybody knows, and so I can see it defeating that. Personally, I'd probably put it just above Dr. No, because this movie is significantly flawed. You can look the other way on certain things, but overall, it most of it is contrived.
When you come in and you're like, okay, story's king, that's the only thing that matters, great, that's the only thing that matters. But then when I look at the whole movie as a whole, which also includes the making of the movie, the cinematography, the music, how it's composed, is the acting good, all that other stuff, it's like, yeah, like those are the things that anybody who's going into these movies are going to go, oh, this wasn't that good. But like this story, I guess, was fine, but like it wasn't supported by great acting, or wasn't really supported by, like, it kind of just looks like ass. And that's where I'm like, I don't know. And it's hard because honestly, like, those other two movies, License to Kill and The Man with the Golden, the one that I'm like, I have more trouble with putting is like The Spy Who Loved Me, because I can see your point of being like, well, it's a better movie, and I'm like, yeah, kind of is. But with License to Kill, that's where I struggle, because I'm like, yeah, but now you're saying a well-crafted movie is compared to this movie, where I feel like this movie actually put a lot more time and effort into even the writing of it, even if you think it has all these nitpicks.
I just see flaws galore on a really good movie that, like, again, as per usual with Bond, if I put the blinders on, like, yeah, it's good. But if I'm actually scrutinizing the plot,
listen, I think Nans and I both agreed. I think this movie is a much better movie than License to Kill. I think it definitely nails the movie making. Everything about this movie screams better than it does License to Kill. That's where I would put it above License to Kill. Yes, I'm using, like, sure, you're going to say, oh, it's because the cinematography. I'm like, I'm not just talking about the cinematography.
No.
I remember going back and watching. I remember going back and watching License to Kill, and I'm just thinking about all of, like, the acting moments. I like, the villains are just kind of like, yeah, they're fine. They're not very Bond-esque. I remember talking about License to Kill as just like, sure. Like, I know at one point you were saying, well, we got to stop doing this thing where it's just because it's not a Bond movie, that doesn't mean it's not a good movie. And I'm like, fine. But at least this movie does things that are close to Bond, but also does things that are very un-Bond. Personally, for me, the reason why I place movies like Honor Majesty's Secret Service and this movie and some of the other ones, even License to Kill, is because they break the norm of what we're expecting out of a Bond movie. Even The Spy Who Loves Me does the same thing, where it's like you're expecting just Bond, saves the day, villains, all that stuff. But Bond is never confronted with the outside of those parameters. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why I like this movie, is because it's handling a subject matter that, especially with the leader of MI6 being M, it's handling a subject matter of, like, his relationship with her, as well as the relationship with her and other agents. I really like that aspect of this movie.
Yeah, this is a much deeper exploration of the character and has the built-in personal stakes of the relationships.
My whole thing, Nans, is that the illusion, the grand illusion is, there's so much about the Bond character, but at the end of the day, what do you really get? Like, what do you get out of Skyfall?
An enjoyable movie and experience. I loved this movie.
No, I'm talking about going back to actual Skyfall. You get one really good moment, which is James hid in this priest's hole when he found out his parents died, and he came out 2 days later. And he was no longer a boy. Like, he came out a man. That's the only thing you get regarding the Bond character, and you don't get anything else. Like, the whole movie, you're expecting there to be a whole bunch of really awesome stuff that you learn about Bond. You don't learn anything about Bond other than he was an orphan, which we already
You're
knew.
just discounting things at this point. You're like, it's not even that important. Because you're just like, oh, the only one thing we learned is this. Like, okay, but we also learned where his backstory is. We learned where he came from. In the Bond universe, at least, we learned that his parents had both died. We learned also that he...
We already knew all these things. Hold on. I get that it was rebooted, but we already knew all of that. God. What did we learn explicitly from this movie? What did we learn about the James Bond character that we didn't already know?
You're doing the thing that I can't stand. You just keep talking when I'm trying to make a point. It's really aggravating.
Answer my question.
I'm trying to, but you do this to Scott, and you do this to people when you won't like back down. You just want to keep going and going and going.
Please answer my question.
Very frustrating, and I'm very tired. I was getting to the point where it's like we learned about his parents. We learned about he came from wealth, which is something that they don't ever really talk about in any of the books. We don't understand like what his thing like as far as what's his background. Like we don't know if he at that point in time. I don't even know if we knew if he was middle class, upper class, any of that stuff. I think that's actually an interesting detail to know that, like, oh, he actually came from wealth. He had these rich parents. They had this rich castle. They lived in Scotland. He actually had another person that he knew prior to even, like, knowing anything about the MI6 agency where he had a mentor of his own. So I like all of those elements. I don't think, but that all being said, I don't think it really, like, hinders the movie by any means. Like, you're just, like, discounting him, like, oh, well, this whole thing, and then we were supposed to think this. I'm like, that's not where I feel like the movie's strengths are in. I think the movie's strengths are in the themes and what the story is coming to, which is basically they're trying to take the whole franchise. Because at this point, we were already promised a reboot with Casino Royale, but we get like a very like, okay, so we're telling the Bond story, and then we get the next little bit that's kind of continuation of that. This, I feel like, is at least trying to make a case for why the Bond franchise should continue. And I think that's why I like this movie so much.
That's what I think is done poorly. All the stuff about, like, is Bond still relevant? Blah, blah, blah. I think it's poorly set up. I think it's poorly executed. I think it's all very much contrived and could have been done a hell of a lot better, considering the fact that GoldenEye already did that and GoldenEye nailed it, whereas this movie set it up, but didn't really set it up well and didn't pay it off well. So we all agree. We all agree that it's in the top 10. I honestly think that the ideal placement for this is number 7. I really do. It supersedes Dr. No's Simple Perfection. Like we've said before, like if a movie if it's big enough, if it excels beyond Dr. No, even though it might have some like questionable plot stuff, then it defeats the Dr. No threshold. Yeah. But this movie has a lot of issues. This movie is far from perfect. It's got a lot of stuff that not only can you nitpick, but those nitpicks add up. They really do. Nitpicks add up over time. For me, it really is like defeats Dr. No, right? It defeats the original movie that has that Simple Perfection in terms of scope.
I'm looking at these two. I'm just looking at License to Kill and The Spy Who Loved Me. What does The Spy Who Loved Me do better than this movie?
Nobody does. That's the answer. That's it. That's the only answer I have. Spy Who Loved Me, it really is like a straightforward Bond plot where it's not trying to bog you down with, it's so meaningful. Here's like this super meaningful stuff. But it really is just like an entertaining movie that's not trying to be super smart.
I need you.
So does England.
I accuse Skyfall of trying to be really smart, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it for all the reasons I've laid out. I don't buy it. I don't buy it so far as it defeating Goldfinger, but I do buy it so far as it defeating Dr. No. Like that's the range that I'm in. Personally, I would put it below A View to a Kill, but you know, knowing where we're all at, I can't help but think that it's like above or below Man with the Golden Gun is, I think, the best position for all of us.
I'm still at 3 or 5.
I like 3 is way too high for a movie that is so flawed. It's just
I don't see the flaws that you do.
Here's what I think.
It's got this guise of being super intelligent.
If you're gonna like come at this movie and be like, it's all the nitpicks are gonna like weigh this movie down, I would also gather to say like this is one of the best made films overall.
As time goes on, the execution of movies gets better and better. And that was kind of what we said about Quantum, is that yes, it's less than perfect, but it should be somewhat elevated because the execution on it is good. That's the eternal struggle of this process, is that you have movies that were made in 1963 versus a film made in 2012. And even though it has some flaws, literally every James Bond movie has its flaws.
I get why you want to put it next to Man with a Golden Gun, but this is where I'm like, okay, I have to be like, I would love to put it number 3 like Nans. But when I think about these movies and I look at License to Kill and I think about this movie, I can't put myself in a world where License to Kill is a better movie than Skyfall when I probably have a 10 times better time watching Skyfall in any fucking day. I feel like I do, like, I understand your whole like gripes with like, feels like it's trying to be more intelligent. I would rather have that than a movie that's just kind of like...
I love James so much.
The things that meet up to License to Kill for me are the stuff that I'm like, it's the way it's made. Like, I feel like...
Okay, so let's agree, fellas. Let's agree that it doesn't pass From Russia with Love, because I'm still in the camp that From Russia with Love is relatively perfect.
Charlie, that's where I'm
despite
at. Like, I'm like,
being old.
Yeah, and I have said earlier, From Russia with Love, I was struggling with.
From Russia with Love is too perfect compared to Skyfall. We all agree now. So so moving down, it's 5 or below. So that being said, I understand the the faults with License to Kill, the bad cinematography. It's got fucking ninjas. Heller had a letter with the missiles and like all the crazy stuff. Like, we're in the territory of flawed, because we all know that all these James Bond movies aren't perfect. They all have their own flaws. Literally none of them are perfect. At that point, it's like what you're dealing with is bad guys, I would say. When it comes to License to Kill, you're weighing Silva versus
I really like,
because remind me what his
Pablo Escobar is,
because Pablo Escobar for basically
dealer.
Like, when it comes down to Pablo Escobar is a drug lord who killed Felix Leiter's wife, right?
Yeah,
like that's really what it comes down to.
But also you have Bond going in there and Bond tricking him.
Right.
He's tricking him into killing his own people.
I thought you'd like to know the information you gave me paid off. I got the guy who set me up.
Because Bond's on his own. He doesn't have the support
they're trying to add elements of
Sergio
anymore. Leone movies.
Bond has gone rogue, and so now he's going in there being like, you can't trust so-and-so, and you can't trust them.
Here's where I feel the most comfortable putting it. I really just think right below From Russia with Love is probably the best spot, and here's why. License to Kill is fine. It's a revenge story. I think the revenge story is just way more interesting and intricate, even though if you think, like, yes, like the themes might not line up. You know, there might be sequences like the escape scene that might not work for you. But I still think when you watch that movie in comparison to License to Kill, I will immediately watch Skyfall over and over and over and over and over again over watching License to Kill. I think when it comes to the craft of both of those movies, I think it's pretty obvious with I don't want to say it's just because of Roger Deakins' cinematography or Adele's but what's his name's music. But when you look at the whole between the cinematography, the music, the acting, because all the acting in this movie is fucking top notch. And save for the plot, but yes, the story, that's where I'm like, this is way more of an interesting movie to be watching every time I go back. I'm like, oh, I love this movie. Where I feel like the flaws in the License to Kill is like, it's one of the dirtiest, less crafted movies in the franchise. Yes, it's like got this really cool revenge plot, but this movie also has a revenge plot that I think is much cooler in retrospect. And I think it ends on like a much more meaningful note. Remember the end of License to Kill?
I'll be up to see you next week. We'll do some fishing.
Good. I'll be out by then. M called.
He tried to reach you. I think he may have a job for you.
Yeah, buddy, my wife's dead, but like, let's go on that fishing trip. Remember
Let's go fishing.
Remember that?
Let's go fishing.
Good.
For a movie that tries to go really hard in like the R-rated end of it, I think the revenge plot in general is kind of undermined by the fact that it's like, it could have gone harder with like the murder of Felix Leiter. Instead, it's like a kind of like, oh, this is the murder of Felix's wife, so he's gonna go after this Escobar guy like that hard. Which feels a little weird.
Yeah, it's not that Bond avenging Felix's wife is weird. It's that the ending doesn't act as a proper emotional bookend to the dramatically intense and violent setup that her death is. Let's go fishing!
Well, it's not just that, but I'm saying like the climax of compare the two climaxes of these movies, right? Compare the climax of License to Kill. That in moment where like they're driving the tanker truck and then it like gets on its side. And where I have issues, and you know this with me with tone, is like, if you have a movie that just like goes really fucking hard on the seriousness. Murder! You want this movie to almost be like an R-rated movie, and then your end little moment is the tanker truck tipping on its side as your big stunt in that movie. It feels very silly. Like, that is just over the top silliness for a movie that's trying not to be that.
Sure, it was at the tail end of Bond's silliness coming off of John Glenn, but it still has its merits.
When you look at that movie as a whole, you're like, it's got its silliness. It's got aspects of it. You're just like, okay, I guess we're going the right. I'm saying these are the sticking points for me with Skyfall. I'm saying the story. I'm gonna do a better story. It's better. I think the story is way more interesting. I think the play between Bond, Silva, M, the whole MI6 era of digital age. I think that is way more thought out, and I think that stuff is way more interesting than the typical revenge plot that we get out of License to Kill. Not to say the License to Kill's revenge plot's terrible, but it's just kind of revenge plots are pretty standard, which is fine. But like I want something else out of it. That villain itself, he's not the most interesting. When I compare Silva and you compare Escobar, I'm like, yeah, I'd rather watch more of Silva. I just think there's just more stuff that I would rather watch.
If there's
over
anything
Skyfall.
that I'm going to throw your way so far as merit, as I said at the very beginning, I will always give this movie good bad guy status. I, of course, still think Sanchez is great because of his valuing trust more than money.
Everyone in my organization, he's 100% loyal. Don't worry, it's only money.
A character trait he shares with Bond that serves to connect them.
You earned it. You keep it, old buddy.
As we've discussed Bond nauseum, these are the best bad guys, the ones that show that fine line between good guy and bad guy. However, Silva and Bond's connection runs a hell of a lot deeper. His whole thing of being like, hey, Bond, you don't need to be part of this MI6 thing. You can go do your own thing, doing whatever you want and selling it to the highest bidder.
You could pick your own secret missions. As I do.
That is rock solid bad guy stuff. I think that him laying out like M's been lying to you is kind of like that's not really effective. But overall, his whole stance as a bad guy, especially having been betrayed directly by M, as the guy who typically champions bad guy, he's got rock solid bad guy status. But he's never going to be up to the level of Alec Trevelyan, specifically because his scheme could have been written better. But if we're just ranking bad guys, I can easily see him above Pablo Escobar as an X00.
And I think where your nitpicks really come into play with me is that I think Goldfinger also has nitpicks that I could pick at. So does From Russia with Love.
Sure.
But again,
all of them.
I think
every one of these movies has nitpicks.
Chairface.
I could also see where I would want to place it above Goldfinger, because while I love that movie, one of the big nitpicks is like he basically sleeps with a woman and then that's how they solve the problem at the end of the movie, really.
His greatest gadget is his dick.
Right.
Latest thing from Q-Branch.
Sure. Anyway, I just think right above License to Kill is a very fair assessment.
Okay.
Between the three of us.
I think that's pretty fair.
Because here's the thing. Charlie, I think you made some clear points. I get where you're coming from. I think they nail it with Silva, at least. I think he's the superior villain of the franchise. Yes, Trevelyan's great. Scaramouche's great. I think he nails... It's just, he's such a better version of the dark James Bond.
But like, contrary to me always being like, I'm all about story and bad guy, there is a balance there where sometimes you have a really good bad guy and there are shortcomings in the story, and those are the things that need to be weighed out, where in essence he's very much like an Alec Trevelyan, but his whole plot is not ruined, but it is jeopardized by cutting corners. Like, oh, isn't his plan so genius? And I'm like, okay, you have this guy who can do anything with a laptop, and yet his big plan is that he's going to get on a train and go to a hearing and shoot M. Like, that's where I'm like, that's cheap. That is cheap. That is lazy compared to what something more clever they could have done. There are so many shortcomings that for me, as I said in the very beginning, I'm like, I can see upwards of 7. Like 7 is the highest that I can see it at. The lowest
But that's because
I can
Golden
see
Gun
it at
is precious to you, right?
No.
It would be above Golden Gun.
Oh.
I could see it above Golden Gun, my precious Golden Gun, but not even. Like, I just love Golden Gun because I think it's very much in character of Bond. But my whole thing is that this movie has incredible assets, but it also has so many questionable elements.
We went through your list. You had like 20 plus nitpicks. McCurdy and I, maybe we have like 5. And for me, the nitpicks don't add up. It's just like a nitpick goes in one random direction. It doesn't snowball into a big.
There's so many fucking nitpicks that means something at a certain point. Like there are significantly more nitpicks than anything else.
Charlie, I'm going to turn into Scott for a moment. So shut the up.
Dude,
I will say the only nitpick that I feel like has any relevance.
Has better nitpicks, more shooting Bond, more resurrection. It's got more of Bond's home life, even though it fucking doesn't. Like this movie doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and it really just is for mass appeal.
No, I would say that the only time I feel like you have any way in what you're talking about, I think it's the train sequence, because most people talk about that constantly at Bond nauseum. Because they're just like, the train sequence doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. It's silly. When I look at the list,
but it is. I mean, it's objectively silly.
Hold on. When I look at the list, License to Kill and The Spy Who Loved Me, I'm like, they're okay, but I don't think they're anywhere near as good as this movie. And I do think, like, for all the things that you're saying, their shortcomings, I'm like, well, look at the things that it does really well. Skyfall has more of a think piece element to it, right? Sure. And I think the and it's dealing with completely different themes. One is more of a modern film. Another one is more of like a nostalgia trip, right? Because like Spy Who Loved Me is all like, let's these things weren't working. Let's go back. Let's find all the best elements of Bond and like shove it into this movie. And that's what we got.
Yeah.
It's like, let's remake You Only Live Twice, which is basically what it does. And I do think this story just stands out compared to the other ones. So,
gun to your head,
that's where I'm
Silva at your crotch. Spy Who Loved Me, Skyfall.
I still think it's a better movie than License to Kill. My problem is I'm looking at this list, and if it was up to me, if we had put License to Kill under Spy Who Loved Me, I would have been more like, okay, I'd put it under that. Problem is, it's just like License to Kill, I feel like is flawed in like its execution, not so much its story elements.
But is that just the cinematography and it being bar trash?
It's also the acting too. Like you got to add that.
But that acting is for like a scene. It's like one scene that's really bad.
Scenes. It's a couple.
Well, okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. What's her name?
It's a couple scenes.
Take me to the bridge. You know, like
it's not even just that. I mean, even
the.
I mean, I would even argue that the Felix Leiter, let's go fishing Bond, like that was even pretty trash.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a trashy movie overall, and it's just like hard for me to be like, let's put this trashy Bond movie with a pretty standard revenge plot, and then that's going to be above a little bit more thought out, classier.
You have class.
Skyfall movie that maybe not hits its points as hard as it probably could, but at least at the core of its story has kind of a very much more interesting tale in the Bond universe than Revenge Bond goes on rogue. Like that's the point I'm trying to hit here. It's like, I know you're saying all these nitpicks, but I'm just like,
we've always liked personal stakes stories.
Yeah, and I think this one has a better personal stakes story. That's where I'm at.
I can see it, fellas.